Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Marcos.
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
I'm good. And you?
I'm
How are
doing
you?
good. I'm doing great this morning. Lisbon is hot and warm, and
Yes.
it's great. It's like summer has arrived.
Yes, indeed. Summer has arrived. Yesterday I almost melted.
Yes.
Yeah.
The heat, yeah.
Yes.
It was hot. Did it get to like 32 Celsius?
I don't know because I didn't check, but returning home, it was really hot, really hot.
Now, you live closer to the beach.
Yes.
When it's hot like this, is the temptation just to go run and jump in the beach, or do you do it in the morning?
Yes, but I do it in the morning. Since 2010, I began running just a little bit, 2 kilometers probably. I will run 2 kilometers and I will run them back. But I do it heading the beach. And so in 11, 12 minutes, I'm at Santo Amaro, Praia de Santo Amaro, and I take a dive.
Yeah.
It's a very quick thing, and then I return home running back, and I do this 6:30 till 7:15.
Oh, good.
In the morning.
Now, let me ask you: do you do it in the winter as well?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because when me and Ruth.
Does Ruth go with you?
No, Ruth does not. Because 7 years ago, when I began doing this, we had Caleb as a little baby, and I was very needed because of that.
Sure.
Of course, a husband is always needed, but with the babies, I was needed. So I realized that for me, if I had to do something like this, like running, making some exercise, I would have to choose an hour that I could be away and not be missed.
Right.
And so I had to wake up earlier than everyone at our home, and so that's why I began doing this. And I had this idea: will I be able to do this during the winter? And because I saw lots of surfers we live in Oeiras, and of course when you surf in Portugal, you surf during the whole year.
Right.
Of course you have a suit.
You have a wetsuit. Right.
But I was thinking, if those guys can be inside the sea, not inside the sea, inside the water.
Inside the water, right? During the winter.
At least I'm going to try. And because it's a very quick dive, it's just taking a dive, and probably I'm not inside the water more than 1 minute. So it's very quick. And you can do it during all the year.
And for those that live here, they know this, but maybe people that would be coming to Lisbon, they might not know it. But the water is freezing.
You know, the water, the time of the year that I feel the water more cold is precisely during springtime.
Springtime, really?
Because, for instance, when you get to November, things get a little cold outside the water, but when you get inside the water is not so and so that's the time of the year when it pays more to get inside the water, because it's already a little bit cold outside, but not inside the water.
Yeah, I would say during the summer it's great because it's hot outside and the water is very refreshing.
Yes.
When we traveled to India, we loved visiting India, and we were able to go down to the beach and jump into the ocean, but it was warm, extremely warm. And it was the same where we grew up in Kenya. It's the same way on the coast, the Indian Ocean. It's just warm, which is great when you first jump in, but then when you're playing around and stuff, you get kind of sweaty.
Yes.
And it's a weird feeling to be like sweating inside the water or in the water.
Yeah. For me as a Portuguese, it doesn't feel right. I was in Brazil 2 months ago, and I went to Fortaleza, and I went to Praia do Futuro, Futuro Beach, and I took a dive, and it was okay, but I need that refreshment mode that we have in Portugal.
Right.
Because it makes, when you get out of the water, it makes you feel energetic in a
Yeah.
way,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it makes you,
Makes you feel alive.
yeah, and it makes you want to feel the sun burning
Yeah.
down on
Oh
you
yeah.
because you went out of the water.
So here's a funny like cultural observation that I've had. Whenever we go to the beach, we go to the beach a lot because I think Portuguese love the beach and they love to be on the beach and they love the water. And so we go a lot with friends. And so we'll go down to the beach and set everything up and set the umbrellas up and of course we bring all our food and all everything. And then we all go down to the beach. And of course the kids have already jumped in because kids they don't care. If it's freezing, they just jump right in. It doesn't matter.
And that helped me wanting to go during all the year to the beach because I saw my little kids.
Oh yeah, and they just
it's
jump
a
right in.
psychological thing.
Yeah. And so the men, we all stand there on the edge of the water, and the water's just coming up, just kind of getting your feet. And the first time it hits your foot, you're kind of like, just you're the gasp of like, oh my goodness, it's freezing. So then eventually the men will get in the water, and then there'll be other men that are standing, my friends that are standing, and the reaction is always, how's the water? And the answer is always, tá boa, right? So you never say it's cold, or you never say, oh, that was the worst.
No, yes, you're
it's
right.
Always like, tá boa.
Yes,
tá boa.
you're right, because although it can be cold, it's supposed to be cold in a good way.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's why we say, está mesmo boa, it's really good.
Yeah. Even though you're like dying inside because it's so freezing.
I don't know, but for me, when you get inside the water, is the first moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of
It's a shock.
It's a moderate shock. But then you feel good about yourself because you're there. I don't know how to explain, but that's why that's how I feel even today when I was. You get inside the water, you feel that cold, but immediately you feel good about, yes, I'm inside the water. I'm surviving this coldness. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something.
It's
At
crazy.
least for me, it's something like this.
I've grown to love it. So
Yes.
it's refreshing. I love the water. I love going down there. So for us, I think we've grown accustomed to it. I think when people come and visit, they're kind of shocked because they think that Portugal is a very Mediterranean climate.
Yes.
And so they think that the water should be nice and warm, and it's not.
Yes.
Because really what we're getting are those Atlantic currents that come straight in.
But it's true that if you go to Algarve, you'll notice that the water there is warmer.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it pays.
Warmer and calmer.
Yes.
Is that right?
It's
we don't get the waves that we get here in Lisbon or
the
north.
waves come, like you were saying, come from Atlantic Ocean.
Right. Yeah. And it actually kind of makes it a little bit dangerous.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I would say where we go down to Caparica, and so I don't think it's as
cool.
dangerous. But I think as you go further north, the waves get pretty heavy and big and very dangerous.
Even if you go to Sintra, to any of the Sintra beaches, it can be dangerous there.
Yeah. Well, this morning, I thought we'd talk about something interesting, talking about dangers in the culture.
Yes.
We wanted to, we always want to talk about culture, and we want to talk about the city of Lisbon, but we also want to kind of talk about maybe some things in the culture that we see, just from our perspective as two pastors here in Portugal. And so I'd love to talk about this and just kind of get your ideas about what you see in the Portuguese culture, what I see in the Portuguese culture, between two big topics. And so the topics are what's happening in our culture with legalism and relativism.
Yes.
So how would you explain first legalism?
I don't know, but if you make me that question, I feel I will have to say that I'm a very prone to legalism person. Would you say like this?
Yeah, prone to legalism. Sure.
So legalism for me, it's a real problem. It's not something that I can talk, feeling that I'm looking at someone else's problem. And how would I define legalism? You say legalism?
Legalism. Yeah.
How would I define legalism? In a way, it's a hope that you can I'm not saying that we feel this consciously inside our minds, but it's a kind of hope that you can save yourself
Sure.
through your own efforts,
Own efforts, own works. Yeah.
your own performance of
Right.
things,
Yeah.
and so you tend to give much value to actions, to
Right.
specific actions,
Right.
because you link that specific actions to a good moral standard,
Right.
good
Right.
character.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I would add to that and say that maybe it's holding to the letter of the law,
Yes.
to those specific requirements or what we interpret our
Yes.
specific requirements. And I think maybe that's the interesting part is when we look into culture, we realize that it's an interpretation of specific practices. And so these practices that we have in a legalistic way are a reflection of what we think would be good for us, or
Yes.
what we think brings us maybe closer to God, or pleases God in some way. So, and like you said, maybe it's done subconsciously or out of a good intention. But what would you say in a culture, in our culture, and we could be talking about Portuguese culture or American culture or any culture really in the world, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the things that legalism does to our hearts when we talk about following God? What are some of the dangers of legalism?
First of all, I would just add that as a recovering legalist,
I love that. I love that phrase, recovering legalist.
I would say that because you were using the expression the letter of the law, and for me, as that kind of recovering legalist that I am, generally you don't think about I have to go after the letter of the law. You think that you tend to, the risk is to, in a very sincere way, overemphasize the value that you take out of particular moral actions.
Sure.
So, at least for me, I'm not a legalist because I want to go after the letter of the law.
Right.
No, at least I don't know legalists like that. But it's because you really believe that doing certain stuff will produce certain outcomes out of
Right.
that, and so
Right.
you believe, you
Yeah.
really believe.
Yeah.
You really believe in making some things
Yeah.
because you believe in the value that those things have. And that's why I think legalism is so dangerous, because it's not something that you hear and you will say,
Right.
oh, I don't want anything to do with that. No, it's something that you can hear and think, oh, that's not a bad thing. Believing in things and trying to behave accordingly, it's not a bad thing.
Right.
But there's the danger, I would say, is that then you kind of lose yourself
Right.
in those things, in a way that those things become disconnected from their origin.
Right.
And
Right.
and their origin, it's God.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you kind of you make yourself satisfied, not on God,
Right.
but on what you perceive that God wants you to do.
Right.
And there's a dangerous discontinuity in those two things.
Yeah.
You can be doing great stuff,
Right. Exactly.
great moral actions, but in a way that you're already disconnected from God.
Right.
And that's why it's so dangerous. That's why legalism is dangerous.
Yeah.
People don't, I think people are not legalists because they are dumb. They are legalists because they really believe in some things,
Right,
but
right.
they kind of lose themselves inside those
Right,
things, disconnecting from God.
And we see this, I think, as people that come from outside of the culture and come into this culture, we see this most evident in how people come and be a part of the community of faith at the church. And so when people come to be a part of the community, I think what is transmitted, if the church or the individual is coming from a more legalistic background, is that people that come into the community, they see that their behavior has to change first in order for them to be accepted by the community, right? So do you see that in your own culture? Do you see those things playing out with how people come into the church or how they're accepted, or what needs to change for people to come in? Is that something that people see or people are
Yes,
aware of?
I believe, yes, I see that. I see that. I see also other things that are new things, and that probably we should address too. But yes, even in my small, it's going to be 10 years since we began this new church that then merged with this old church, right where we are right now, Igreja da Lapa. It's been 10 years since we began that, and of course, in these 10 years, I can acknowledge that lots of times, for me as someone who grew up in an evangelical church, sometimes you kind of expect that for someone to fit in inside an evangelical church, yes, you kind of wait for behavior to happen first.
Okay.
It's not conscious again.
Right. It's not conscious. Exactly.
It's not something that, because we are not preaching that.
Right.
At least I'm not preaching that.
Right.
I'm not preaching behavior. But yes, but it's true that you kind of you look at people's behavior like how would I say this? Like the more consistent thing that the person can say about himself or herself. And in that way, we kind of expect that first it will come behavior and then all other things. But I don't want to make things complicated, because I really struggle with this. This is something that really is a very personal thing for me. At the same time, when you read the scriptures, scriptures they really they look at action as something very important.
Exactly.
So it's not disconnected from what you are, and that's why I believe the Pharisees there were so much Pharisees, because there was an environment where Pharisees could just spring out of Judaism, because Judaism really has a strong appreciation
absolutely, of the law and the
of the
practice
law
of
and
the
the
law.
practice.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point here, is because I think in the past we've kind of bashed legalism, and maybe rightly so, to try to say, okay, we shouldn't be legalistic, because, and I think that's what the culture sees when they look at the church. They go, well, why would I want to be a part of this community of faith that's just legalistic, and they talk more about my behavior and what needs to change. But like you said, I think they get a bad rap. We give it a bad rap. In other words, I think, like you mentioned, the Pharisees, I think it's so easy for us to look at the Pharisees and judge them and say, wow, they didn't know anything. But what you're saying, and I think you're right, is that they actually, in a very zealous way, wanted to uphold God's law. But I think they did it in such a way that created a focus more on the rules instead of the relationship with God. Right?
Yes.
And so it's interesting to have this balance between our tendency to condemn legalism, which we should do, but then also to do it in a way that understands that people they don't begin their lives or their ministries, or the church doesn't say, okay, we want to be a legalistic church. It's almost that you fall into that because of maybe the cultural environment, or a desire to protect the truth of what you believe in that.
And let me give you an example of my own, in a way, I guess I can say this, in my own legalism. I remember, so if you grow up in an evangelical church in Portugal, evangelicals, for instance, they don't smoke.
Exactly.
Okay? They don't smoke, generally. Or if they...
But they do drink.
They do drink. There's a difference.
There's a difference. That's right.
But or if you're an evangelical and if you smoke, you'll hide.
You'll hide it.
Yeah, you'll hide it.
You know what's really funny is Baptists in America do the same thing.
Yes.
They just go out back and smoke.
And probably we don't smoke because of you, American Baptists.
Yeah. So sorry about that.
No, but it's okay, because I really believe that when we open the Word, something like smoking probably it will be challenged by the world.
Absolutely. And it should be.
Like
Absolutely.
smoking or like heavy drinking or any
Absolutely.
kind of
Vice or addiction or absolutely.
So, but just to get you an example out of this smoking thing, we have people, we baptize people that smoke.
Right.
And generally we address that as something that the person who's getting baptized should really think about.
Right.
But for me, it doesn't make sense not baptizing someone because that person smokes.
Right.
And in the past, it would happen like that.
Okay.
So I would say this is a very simple example of legalism.
Right.
You smoke. You're not able to be baptized.
Right.
And so, I think it's legalism.
Has that happened in the past, do you think?
In the past? Oh, of course.
They kind of draw the line and say, well,
yes, of course.
Because you smoke, it obviously means that you...
No one... That's why in that case I have to defend legalists, because generally they aren't dumb people.
Right.
So no one will say, because you smoke, you're going to hell. At least I've never met a legalist that will say that, because it's a stupid thing to say. And
exactly.
You cannot draw that kind of thinking out of the Bible. But people will not say, "Oh, you smoke, you're going to hell." But "Oh, you smoke," and so they will find a breach. That will make things impossible in terms of someone identifying as a Christian. And so in the past, people probably would not be baptized if there was a smoking habit known.
Right. Do you think that the culture at large, when they look at the evangelical church here in Portugal, do they think that we're just a bunch of legalists? Or what do you think they're... Maybe they don't even think that far.
Yes, probably they don't think that far, because they don't have categories sometimes even to know that we do exist. And if they know that we do exist, probably yes, people will think that we are a bunch of legalists. But in that sense, if we live in such a relativistic environment like we do right now, and I'm being very sincere, I'm not that bothered by the idea that non-believers find me legalist. I'm not that bothered, because in a general environment, I would say that, it makes sense, because our culture got really relativistic.
Right.
So,
and truthfully...
But I'm not hoping, but I want to say this also. I'm not looking for that. And I want to be fair. There's a way that non-believers can perceive some legalism inside Christian churches, and they can be right about that. Or Christians can be wrong about portraying themselves in a way that Christianity gets mixed with legalism. So it's not an easy subject, because we have to be fair to all parts involved.
And I think that, like, at the base of that is this age-old accusation against Christians of hypocrisy. So saying, well, you say something but you don't practice it, or you talk about the rules, which would be legalism, and but you don't really live it. And so there's always this accusation of hypocrisy. But I want to explore this, because I think it's interesting. In Portugal, because we're such a small community, a tiny community of faith, across Portugal, there's not a huge percentage. Evangelicalism is not a massive representation of the population. But you've talked in the past about embracing the strangeness of what that is. And so in a sense, almost owning the fact that we're going to be different and weird, and it might be that we are accused of certain things, but being okay with that. So how would you see it as a pastor here at Lapa, in this culture? How do you strike a balance between this idea that we just have to sometimes assume that we're strange and we do things differently, and that what people see is going to just fall in a weird category, but then also fighting and combating this idea that we don't want to portray ourselves as legalistic, or as just hypocrisy rampant within our church, and we just say things and then don't live them. So how do we approach that balance?
I don't know, but I'm thinking two things. One is if it presses really hard on you, if you spend a lot of time being worried about what people will think about you, probably that means that you are enslaved to other people's opinions.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
so,
point.
and I can say this because this is something that I know personally. So, for me, as a young pastor, we are going to be 40.
We're young pastors, aren't we? We can still say
I
that.
hope so. I hope so. But as a young pastor, with some opportunities of talking publicly about my faith to non-believers in a place like Portugal, and I've had that kind of opportunities. And when people like what you are saying, and people who don't belong to your flock or who don't agree with your religion, I know that it can be really enslaving because you can be worried all the time you can be worried all the time to be the evangelical guy who's loved by non-evangelicals.
Right.
And I know a little bit about that. So if you are always thinking, oh, I don't want to portray myself as a legalist, in a way, you are not free. You are not free.
Right.
You are hoping for everyone to like you, and I know that because of my own experience, and this is something that I have to ask God to help me because I know how that feels.
Yeah.
So
and I see this all over. So it's not just me or you.
Yes.
I think this is happening on a larger scale within the evangelical community.
Yes.
Almost being ashamed of being evangelical in that sense.
And that's why I was saying to you that if we tackle legalism, we have also to talk about this new relativism that belongs mostly, I would say, in new evangelical churches that are so drawn to look for non-believers' approval that it's a dangerous place to be. I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
So do you think this would be a reaction against
Yes,
legalism?
it's a reaction.
Of maybe the generation of our parents, or kind of maybe that maybe came into our generation a little bit?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit, what do you see in our culture now in the evangelical world, this reaction against legalism, and then what you've described as relativism within the church?
I want to be fair because I'm thinking about people, some of them really good friends, and so people who I don't always agree with, but who are strong Christians in some areas of their lives where I'm not. So it's always a difficult subject when, but of course I want to have my eyes open and be sincere about what I'm seeing. I would say that mostly in people coming out from Pentecostalism, there's a kind of, for me, it's not that interesting post-Pentecostalism. People who grew up in even more legalist churches than Baptist ones, and I love Pentecostals. I try to be a good Pentecostal in a Reformed Baptist way.
Right.
So I really believe in the good things of Pentecostalism, but Pentecostalism had a lot of legalism, much more hardcore than in Baptist churches. And I have some friends who came out of that, and I think it's not something that they consciously want or desire, but I see lots of people going really after the opposite way, and so getting more relativistic about everything in life, and that kind of it bothers me a little bit because I don't think that's the way. And you know, Mark, there's a way of becoming relativist there's a way of becoming relativist that's very legalist.
Sure,
I don't want to
sure.
be playing with words,
But isn't that interesting?
yes,
Yeah.
because in a way, Tim Keller he explains this. In a way, you feel above other people's simple morality.
In the way that you relate to
Yes.
culture and
Because in a way you feel more enlightened, and so you'll say, oh, I don't put myself in those small moral boxes.
Right.
And so you feel above moralists.
Sure.
But that's a kind of moralism.
Exactly. Yeah, you've just fallen into the same trap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what's good and what's bad, I'm above that, and things are not that simple. You always have some kind of way of getting around things, and in a way you become like the Pharisees. Remember that one of the things that Jesus criticized about the Pharisees, it's because they felt good about themselves. And lots of relativist people that I know, they feel good about themselves because they feel morally superior to those simpletons who need bad and right and good categories, but they are above that. And it's a very pharisaical, that's a very pharisaical way of living. Although you relativize everything.
So looking forward in the future for evangelical thought in life and just the future of evangelicalism here in Portugal, what's the biggest threat? Is it legalism or is it relativism?
Right now, I would say that for our generation, I think that relativism is more dangerous for our generation. Because we grew up in a different environment than our parents.
Absolutely.
Our parents grew up in churches that would say that if you go to the movies, you couldn't go to the movies, or you couldn't play cards, you couldn't dance. So for them, I would say that legalism was really an issue. But let's be frank. At least I'm talking about myself. Right now, that's not the environment I have in my own church, at least. Although I'm saying this, but I can still acknowledge that legalism lurks in very creative ways. Very creative ways. So it's not a thing. Oh, it's done. It's not a menace for us. No, it's still a very dangerous thing. But I would say that relativism probably it will. People will in our generation it will fall in love more with relativism than with legalism.
What do you think this will do to the church in general in Portugal if churches continue to be more relativistic? What are some of the dangers that come into that?
If you are a legalist, you just kind of back away from reality. You live in
withdraw from culture.
Yeah, you draw. You
establish boundaries.
Yes, in such a way that, and one of the things of legalism is that you become a dualist. And dualism, it's a kind of heresy.
Exactly.
We don't believe in dualism.
That's right.
We don't believe in a good God and a bad God. And there's a kind, sometimes in a legalist environment, there's a kind of dualism, God against the devil. Of course, God is against the devil, but devil is not a bad God because the devil, Satan is not a God. And in some more legalist enviriments, and with all the love that I have for Pentecostals, but in Pentecostalism, I would say it's stronger. You fall into this dualist trap. And so you are always, oh, that's from the devil. And so it's always about Satan and God and
almost like they two competing equal forces.
And you just kind of give up on culture and secular life. And you say this belongs to the devil, which is a lie, and it will, and it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. For the relativists, it will make you so much a part of your own society that you'll not be any different.
So the lines get blurred. There's no difference between.
You go to a church and it's a kind of, how would you say, ONG? In Portugal, it's ONG.
Like a non-profit. It's a so maybe something that helps the community or
Yes.
does good
Yes.
deeds or good things,
And
but
it's good, but it will,
there's no
at
distinction.
the end of the day, it
Right.
will get you a new kind of legalism.
Exactly.
You have to be good.
Exactly.
Oh, the thing about Christianity is about action.
Actually,
And
yeah.
so you become a relativist
Yeah.
Pharisee.
Yeah. So I know we have just a couple minutes left, but when we talk about the balance between these two, we talk about the gospel. So how does the gospel help us be balanced in fighting legalism and fighting relativism, in becoming more and more centered on the gospel? How does that help us live in balance between these two?
I will try to answer you, but let me be the one making you a question now.
I don't want to answer any questions.
No, but that's why I really think it will be much more productive and helpful. What's your general take on this legalism thing in Portugal? And be honest.
On legalism and relativism, on both things?
And inside our evangelical Portuguese churches.
I would say one of the hard things that we see here as we've come into this culture and just watched is that in a certain way, we've talked about this, is that what's communicated to people as they're coming from the outside, as they're coming from the culture and interacting with a community of faith, for example, is that what's communicated is behavior has to change first before they belong and before they believe, which I think that the gospel talks about belonging and believing, and that makes long-lasting life change. So behavior changes as a result of what God does in our hearts and minds because of the gospel. And so I think this can go either way. This can go towards the legalist side or the relativist side. I think what's communicated in the legalist side here in Portugal is that you have to change your behavior. So you have to act like us, talk like us, dress like us in order for you to come and be a part of this community. On the other hand, isn't it ironic that the same message is being communicated from a relativistic standpoint? So what they're saying is, you come be a part of our community and talk like us, act like us, do what we do, and there's no conviction there. There's no heart change. And so somebody like relativism, I think completely opposite, but in the same way, you could have people come to your church and never really know that what it means to follow Jesus, or what are the requirements for following Jesus, because the Bible is very clear. There are things, and the Bible constantly talks that the gospel is about repenting and believing, repenting and believing. And so on one side where it focuses on behavioral change, the other side blurs the line and doesn't talk about any change needed individually or collectively. And so it's fascinating to me that we have both of these at work. And of course, the answer is always, as we come and look at this, is this gospel balance between these two things. But I think this is interesting because one of the things that we've noticed time and time again is people from the outside come and look at the inside, the evangelical communities, is that I think both sides are very difficult in the sense that they're not communicating the gospel very well. And so the bigger question for us is, how do we pull the legalists and how do we pull the relativists into a gospel-centered approach that communicates clearly to people who are lost and dying and desperate need of Jesus, that he is the only way, and that repentance and belief is at the core of what has to happen in order for us to be a part of the community of faith.
That's why in 2 minutes you said everything that needed to be said.
I don't know about that.
But just trying to answer your question, I'm thinking two things about gospel solution. I really love the Sermon of the Mount, or Sermon
on the Mount.
On the Mount, or do you say?
I'm pretty sure it's on the Mount.
Yes, it's on. But
because Jesus was on the Mount.
Yes, it's not of the Mount. I really love the Sermon on the Mount, and I've been studying that sermon these last 2 years. First of all, a thing. The gospel, the message of Jesus, tells us that we don't belong to Jesus we don't belong to Jesus only by dealing with what Jesus says. So
Yeah.
it's really important for you to go read the Sermon on the Mount
Absolutely.
if you're a Christian and live by that. But your Christian life is, of course, it calls the way that you engage with Jesus' words.
Yeah.
But being a Christian calls you to engage with Jesus' life and with Jesus' death and with Jesus' resurrection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not only, oh, I love the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount because it says wonderful things, and I want those wonderful things to be a part of my life. Okay, that's good, but remember that following Jesus is hearing Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount, but following him in death and in resurrection.
That's right.
So it's not only about what Jesus says, it's about how Jesus lives and how Jesus dies and how Jesus rises again. Yeah. And this first thing about Sermon on the Mount, because there's a very legalist way of enjoying the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly.
You will say, "Oh, I'm a red letter Christian. I'm a Christian that I don't want to know what Paul says and what the Bible. I want to mostly I want to know what Jesus says." And that's a very legalist way of being a Christian.
Right.
And so I deal with this part of Jesus' discourse, and this is the thing. No, it's not. It's a part, but you have to deal with other things. But one of the great things of the Sermon on the Mount, and it's really, like you say in America, mind-blowing, is that Jesus says that Jesus spends a lot of time going after the Pharisees. Yeah. But he makes a compliment. At the same time, he makes a compliment to the Pharisees, because he says that you have to be a fair person, a righteous person, in a bigger way than the Pharisees are. Yeah. And I hope I'm not making a wrong exegesis out of this text. But what he's saying is that if you want to follow me, never mind the Pharisees. No, he's saying you have to be better than these guys right here. Yeah. So we have something to learn out of those guys. That's right. Because they were the ones who were mistaking being saved with being happy about yourself. Yeah. They're the ones. Right. And we live in a very relativist age where we are Pharisees because we live happy with ourselves. Right. And so the gospel calls you, Jesus calls you to much more than only this. Yeah. I'm not explaining that well, but this is two things that I really believe they for me are inspiring when I think about the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, I think we're going to stop right here. Yes. But maybe we should explore this a little bit further as well.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
We will.
You're right. Your instinct. You have a good instinct, Mark.
I get it from you.
No, you don't.
Everything I know is from Pastor Tiago.
That's a lie.
I listen to your sermons.
That's a lie being told live on tape.
It's recorded now.
Recorded lies. We can do a podcast called Recorded
Lies. Yeah. Okay. Well, as always, at the end of our podcast, we do want to invite you to be a part of our community of faith here at Lapa Church, Igreja de Lapa. And so we meet every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. And then at the end of the month, the last Sunday of the month, we have an English service, worship service, that starts at 5 p.m. And so actually this is the last Sunday of the month coming up.
Please come.
So come and be a part of it. We'd love to have you come and participate.
Mark will be preaching.
I will. I'll be preaching. So pray for that I'll be able to preach the word. And we'd love to have you. So
come, guys. If you're Portuguese, if you're non-Portuguese, if you're an English-speaking person or else, please do come.
Yeah. See you at Lapa.
See you.